Constantinople, the greatest consuming center of the East for over 10 centuries. In its harbors, cargo ships used to arrive every day, carrying aboard food and goods, raw materials and processed products from the provinces of the empire and foreign countries. Olkas was one of these ships. Olkas was a merchant ship already known since the ancient times that during the Byzantine era sailed in the seas of the East, carrying dozens of products to and from Byzantium. In the most important harbor of Constantinople, known as Theodosius Harbor, recent archaeological excavations brought to light 37 shipwrecks, offering to us a journey in time from the 5th till the 11th century AD. Piers, anchors, amphorae and other pots and jars carrying wine, olive oil, food, tools and utensils reveal the miscellaneous commercial transactions of the time. But Olkas, apart from the food and the objects, basically transported merchants, artists, pilgrims, travelers. She was transporting ideas, art trends and values that deeply affected the medieval culture of the East, which in most cases was based on the art of the capital. Olkas is ready to sail again to new sea routes, new transport and transit centers, from Black Sea to Eastern Mediterranean Sea, from Constantinople to the Aegean Sea and the island of Cyprus. The ports in the Aegean Sea, even since the prehistoric times, functioned as merchant stations in the sea route of ships carrying products. At least until the middle of the 7th century, the Aegean Sea islands were prospering, and as a result, through their ports, the goods from and to the capital were transported freely and safely. Nevertheless, the Arabian raids in 7th century caused the abandonment of ports, forcing the inhabitants to move inland. The peace in the Aegean was restored in 961 after the liberation of Crete by Nicephorus Phocas that triggered a period of financial, intellectual and artistic prosperity, which has been imprinted in the cultural remains of all these ports. 2.5 centuries later, the financial penetration of Latins in Byzantium changed again the balance. From the beginning of the 13th century, the great maritime cities of Venice, Genoa and Pisa competed for the control of transit trade in the Black Sea, the Aegean and the Mediterranean. Olkas, having crossed the Marmara Sea and the Dardanelles, stops for the necessary supplies. Her first stop, Lemnos. Myrina, today's capital of the island, inhabited continuously since the prehistoric times, was exporting olive oil and wine in ancient times. It was already known in the Middle Ages for the production of the famous Limnian earth, the remedy of the time for plague and dysentery. Its commercial activity increased in the 14th century when it became a trading center for the Mount Athos monasteries. The remains of the Venetian castle dominate the west side of the town. The presence of Venetians left its traces on the northern coast of Limnos, in Kotsinas, where they established a thriving maritime community. At the same time, they built the famous castle that protected the port, making it, since the 14th century, an important trading center. Very soon, the Byzantine emperors realized the importance of their cooperation with the great maritime cities Genoa and Venice, and made treaties with them, ensuring many privileges for the free passage of their ships carrying their products. With the Treaty of Nymphaeum in 1262, the first Genoese trading center was established in Mytilene. The island of Lesvos was not chosen at random. It controlled the maritime routes of the northeastern Aegean, from Syria and Egypt to Constantinople and the Black Sea, and at the same time provided the capital with wine, olive oil, grain and minerals. Upon their settling in Mytilene, the House of Gatalousi renovated the existing Byzantine castle, which protected the two harbors on each of its sides. The Gatalousi, this powerful family of Genoese patricians, was immediately greatly interested in the alum mines in the region of Stipsi. So, nearby Molivos, protected by its fortified castle, developed an intense commercial activity in one of its harbors, allowing the second harbor to function for military purposes. The island of Chios as well held an important position in the maritime routes. The archaeological data prove that even since the early Christian years, in the island had been erected ecclesiastical monuments, such as the St. Isidore's martyrdom, which was uncovered in Chios under a later church. At the end of 10th century, Chios was already a cultural and military center. In the hinterland of the island, impressive castles were erected for the protection of the inhabitants, whereas the port of Chios became an important commercial transit center. During the mid-Byzantine years, many important monasteries were established in the island. Among them, we distinguish the Nea Moni, built with imperial sponsoring by Constantine Monomachus, decorated with impressive mosaics. From an architecture and artistic point of view, Chios belongs to Constantinople school and has no relation with the rest of Greece. All its relations throughout the years were always with the East. The natural wealth of the island attracted Venetians, Genoese and Ottomans, ending, after consecutive conflicts, in the hands of the Genoese in the 13th century. The Genoese built a series of watchtowers around the coasts to control navigation and took care of the defense system of the island. They reinforced the fortification of the city port of Chios, as well as of the mastic-produced villages in the plain, which lies to the southeast side of the island. The most important product to be exported was the mastic, which has been cultivated in Chios since the ancient times, intensified in the medieval years by the Genoese, and was the basic wealth of the island. Also, since the ancient times, the exquisite wine of Chios traveled as far as Alexandria, making the island an important trade station, organized with Genoa as a model. The island of Samos was also famous from antiquity for the big temple of Hera, as well as for its wine production. In the early Byzantine times, there are testified intense trading activities since Samian products, mainly the wine and the olive oil, were transported to faraway places. The Pythagorean settlement, built upon the ancient capital of Samos, was fortified at the end of the 7th century for the protection from the Arabs and greatly reinforced by the Genoese Giustiniani family who governed the island in the 14th century. Pythagoreia had two harbors, a commercial and a military one, on the side of which the whole settlement moved, when gradually the northeastern coast of the island became the center of interest. Today's town of Samos, called Panormos in ancient years, took a leading role in the 17th century, when the wine of Samos was transported from the port of Vathi to Chios, Smyrna and Rhodes. In the late 18th and the early 19th centuries, the famous wine, thanks to the favorable terms of the Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca, traveled to all ports of the Ottoman Empire and the Greek communities in Russia, Alexandria and Europe. Olkas continues her journey in the east coast of the Aegean Sea. Her next stop, the island of Patmos, which was favored by the Byzantine emperors since the 10th century. In 1082, the Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, with an imperial bull, gave sovereignty over the island of the Apocalypse to Saint Christodulus. A few years later, in 1088, Saint Christodulus founded the monastery dedicated to Saint John the Theologian, which, because of its castle-style structure and its heirlooms, consists a precious Byzantine heritage and one of the most important Christian pilgrimage destinations. The ships of the monastery were favored by the Byzantine emperors, the knights, the Venetians and the Ottomans. The ship owners, gradually till the 18th century, managed to develop their own power, reaching Venice, Egypt and the Black Sea with their vessels. In the same maritime routes that connected Constantinople with Egypt and Syria, but also with Italy, Asia Minor and Rhodes, the island of Kos became one more important transit station. Known since the ancient times for its Asclepion, it had a safe harbor from which pilgrims, travelers, but products as well, were coming to the island or were transported to Rhodes and the nearby coast of Asia Minor. Kos, being also famous for its wine, attracted the interest of the Byzantines, became a target for pirates, and finally enjoyed political stability with the arrival of the Knights of the Order of St. John. The 14th century was the start of a new era for the Dodecanese Islands. Located in the eastern part of Greece, in a crucial point between Asia Minor and Cyprus, Rhodes continued its development from antiquity. From the 6th century onwards, Rhodes had two harbors, the central big one, used for commercial exchanges, and one to the north, which served as state dockyard. In 1309, the Knights of the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, coming from Cyprus, bought the island of Rhodes from the Genoese, and very soon they settled all over the region. During the time of the occupation by the Knights, Rhodes, basically thanks to its port, thrived greatly, being on a crossroad, and was considerably upgraded. Because of its position exactly on the maritime routes that connected the east with the west, and between Cyprus and the east, the whole structure of the town was focused around the port. In the capital of the island, the Knights built the Palace of the Grand Master, which today is an UNESCO's World Heritage Site.
Το παλάτι του Μεγάλου Μαγίστρου, γνωστό σήμερα και ως Καστέλο.
The Palace of the Grand Master, also known as Castello, was the administration center and a natural citadel, and on its site, the first Byzantine fortress must have been built under the Arabs. According to recent researches, here was erected the legendary Colossus of Rhodes.
Ο περίφημος Κολοσσός της Ρόδου.
Greeks, Latins, Jews and Syrians lived together harmoniously and made the island a great trading center of the Eastern Mediterranean, from which wine, olive oil, honey, spices, caviar, perfumes, textiles, carpets, soap and sugar were transported. At the same time, the island kept strong connections with Constantinople, Cyprus, Italy, and other parts of the Eastern world, which are reflected in the art, the pottery, and the objects of daily life as well. South of the town of Rhodes, the Lindos harbor was developed, a base for the Knights in their effort to conquer the capital of the island. During the occupation by the Knights, a castle was built in the place of the ancient Acropolis, which protected the port and the seaways to Cyprus, Crete, and Egypt. Its medieval urban architecture, present today thanks to the captain's mansions of the 17th century, reminds its glorious past. Olkas sails in the Aegean towards the ports of the Greek mainland. Thanks to its geographical position near the only land passage from central Greece to the Peloponnese, Corinth became a great political, religious and financial center and a very important trade hub during the Byzantine times. Byzantine Corinth was the most important town of the empire to the south of Thessaloniki. A great urban center, an administrative center of the empire, and the seat of the Greek Orthodox Diocese. It is the continuation of ancient Corinth, located in a very interesting position. It was built on a strategical site near the isthmus, with an important castle on the hill of Acrocorinth and two harbors, one on the Corinthian Bay, the harbor of Lechium, that connected the town with the ports of the west, and one on the Saronic Gulf, the harbor of Kechre, that connected the town with the ports of the east. In both harbors, early Christian basilicas were built, and Byzantine settlements were developed. In the Lechian harbor, the Basilica of St. Leonidas was excavated, one of the biggest basilicas in the world, with exquisite architectural members made by Proconnesian marble, pointing out the direct relation with Constantinople. The imported pottery prove the rich commercial contacts the town had with the important centers in the Mediterranean, in Italy, Spain, North Africa, Palestine, Asia Minor and Constantinople, from the 5th till the 13th century. Corinth was also exporting silk and agricultural products, mainly currants, so much connected with history of the region that they took their name from the city, Corinth. Close enough to Corinth was Piraeus, the legendary harbor of Athens in the ancient times. During the Byzantine times, life in the port continued in more silent ways, but Piraeus remained the main access to Athens from the sea. In 1318, the maritime maps refer to it as Porto Leone because of the stone statue of a lion that stood on the entrance of the port till 1688, when Francesco Morosini took it to Venice. The great development of Piraeus started at the turn of the 19th century, and until today it is the biggest port of Greece. Olkas, continuing her journey, passes through the ports of the islands of the Cyclades.
From the ancient times till today, the Cyclades are the connecting link between Greece and Asia Minor. They were precious stations for the maritime trade and transfers from Constantinople to the South Aegean and the Mediterranean and vice versa. The Byzantine presence is very vivid in Andros, which especially in the 11th and 12th centuries was famous for its silk and textiles used for the making of luxurious garments. Andros is the second biggest island of the Cyclades. Many Byzantine monuments point out Andros' relation with the Greek mainland. Byzantine influence is imprinted in the architecture and the works of art in the island that testify the artistic and commercial transactions with the rest of the ports. The castle, in the capital of the island, is a heritage of the very active era, when Andros was ruled by the Venetian nobleman Marino Dandolo in the early 13th century and built it to serve as his mansion. Olkas' next stop is Naxos, the biggest island of the Cyclades, inhabited continuously from the ancient times till today. Its size and its fertile soil favor agriculture and stock farming, make the island self-sufficient, and that is obvious even in the Byzantine times, with the hundreds of Byzantine chapels and the castles that still exist. An ancient temple of Apollo in an islet north of the port was turned into a Christian church during the 6th century. In the inland, at the same era, a basilica was built, turning the temple of Demeter into a Christian church. More than any other island in the Aegean, Naxos preserves a great number of Byzantine monuments representing all periods, especially the period of the iconoclastic controversy, as several churches with no figurative depictions are preserved. In the early 13th century, when Naxos passed to the jurisdiction of the most serene Republic of Venice, Marcos Anudo, who captured the island in 1207, founded the Duchy of the Archipelago with Naxos as its capital, and built a new impressive castle upon the ruins of the ancient and Byzantine one, reinforced by many towers. The island was famous for its products that were transported by Olkas vessels and later by Venetian ships all over the east. Agricultural products and the so-called Naxian emery from the quarries of the island were some of them. Because of its important position on the commercial seaways linking the Greek mainland with the eastern Greek islands and the coast of Asia Minor, Paros with its ports, Parikia and Naousa, soon proved to be one of the most important islands in the maritime routes of Aegean. From its quarries came the famous white marble, which was largely used for sculpture since ancient times, whereas archaeological evidence proved the continuation of its production and its export in the Byzantine times as well. When Christianism prevailed, Paros really thrived, and that is reflected in the magnificent church of Panagia Ekatontapiliani, one of the biggest in the Aegean Sea, erected by Justinian in the 6th century. It's one of the greatest Byzantine pilgrimages, a great church copying the architectural style of Constantinople. The Venetian castle on the hill of the ancient Acropolis waves goodbye to Olkas, which continues sailing to the waters of Mediterranean. Her next stop, the Cretan ports for the necessary supplies and several new commercial transactions.
Η Κρήτη ήταν μια ιδιαίτερα σημαντική επαρχία.
Crete was a particularly important province of Byzantium. Its capital, was Gortin, in the center of the fertile plain of Messara, even since the Roman era.
Η Γόρτινα ήδη από τη Ρωμαϊκή περίοδο.
In this plain, during the 7th century, a big basilica was erected, dedicated to Saint Titus, which meant to be one of the most important Christian monuments in Crete. During the next centuries, in Crete were erected churches and monasteries which followed the architectural and artistic streams of Byzantine and later Venetian style. Meanwhile, in the northern part of the island, which was mostly suitable for the mooring of the ships, were developed the main ports of Crete, which particularly in the Venetian period were reinforced by strong fortifications. The Arabian raids was the reason for the fortification of Heraklion and the building of a moat around it, and that fact was the inspiration for its Arabic name, Rabd al-Kandak or Handakas. The town was finally conquered in 828 AD by the Arabs, who launched their raids from Handakas in the Aegean until 961 AD, when Nicephorus Phocas conquered it back. Till the end of the 12th century, Handakas thrived commercially and financially, and under its Venetian name Candia, became the capital of the Venetian kingdom of Crete and the most important commercial hub of Venice in the East Mediterranean since 1211. The port was reinforced with a strong fortress, Castello a Mare, whereas on the south end of the bay, a complex of arsenals was constructed. The contact with Venice led to an artistic development, as from the late 15th century till the 17th century, the Cretan painting school flourished, influenced from both the Italian Renaissance and the Byzantine tradition. During this period, Handakas was the cradle of artistic creativity for some of the most important painters in the history of art, such as Dominicus Theotokopoulos, widely known as El Greco, Michael Damaskinos, Angelos Akotantos, Andreas Rizos, Georgios Klodzas, and so forth. West of Heraklion, the port of Rethymno thrived. The Venetians changed the urban character of the city and enhanced the fortifications that existed from the Byzantine times. Later, the Ottomans added the lighthouse at the end of the northern pier. In the 14th century, the harbor of Rethymno was the center of gathering and forwarding products from and to the inland, coming from the great transit port of Heraklion, from which it imported iron and timber and to which it exported grains. Since the 16th century, Rethymno had commercial relations with more ports, as the ones of Alexandria, Marseille, Constantinople and Smyrna, to which it exported olive oil, citrus fruits, cheese and wine, and from which it imported timber, spices and legumes. The most important port of West Crete was undoubtedly the ancient and early Byzantine city of Kydonia, which was renamed to Chania after the Venetian rule. Since the beginning of the 13th century, the need for dominant presence of Venetian fleet in the island resulted in the construction of arsenals for keeping and repairing the ships in wintertime, whereas for needs of safest navigation, a lighthouse was erected at the entrance of the port.
Το λιμάνι τώρα της πόλης είχε ιδιαίτερη σημασία.
The port of Hania was particularly important for the Venetians because it was the first they met coming from Venice, and it was the safest in that seaway. The entrance of the port was protected by the fortress known as Rivellino del Porto. On the pier, there is the St. Nicholas Bastion, equipped with cannons for the protection of the north side. During the ages, along the whole coastline of Crete, other smaller ports were developed, as the one of St. Nicholas Bay, the one of Chersonesus, which served as the seat of the diocese and religion center since the early Christian times, and the one of Panormo in Milopotamos.
Το Πάνορμο ήταν η έδρα της Καστελανίας του
Panormo was the capital of the Castellania of Milopotamos. Castellania were the counties of Crete as divided by the Venetians, covering regions like today's provinces. In Panormo was the Milopotamos castle, in ruins today, and the port was a center for exporting farming products, carobs in large quantities, and other local products. Olkas arrives to her destination. Cyprus had a great nautical tradition since the ancient years, playing a crucial role to the maritime networks due to its privileged geographical position and for the commerce of its copper. Irrefutable witness of Cyprus' communication with the Aegean and Asia Minor coasts is the famous Olkas that was lifted off in the port of Kyrenia, with part of her cargo consisting mainly of Rhodian amphorae. During the early Christian era, the island was an indispensable stop for all ships sailing from Egypt to Constantinople with their cargoes full with grain. From its ports passed merchants, soldiers, travelers, and pilgrims on their way to visit sacred places in the East Mediterranean and the Aegean.
Από τη στιγμή που η Κύπρος αποτελεί μέρος της Βυζαντινής Αυτοκρατορίας,
From the moment that Cyprus became part of the Byzantine Empire, it had contact with Constantinople and the rest of the Byzantine ports as well. Cyprus was a transit center for the pilgrims traveling from Rome to the Holy Land, from Egypt to Constantinople and the whole coast of the Black Sea.
Και ολόκληρη την Μαύρη Θάλασσα.
From the Roman period till the early Christian times, Paphos was a thriving and the most important port of Cyprus. The city was Christianized by St. Paul, who departed from its port to Pergae in Asia Minor. During the next centuries in the city of Paphos, as well as in the wider area, mainly in Polis Chrysochous and in Pegia, impressive basilicas, fully covered with mosaics, were erected.
Το λιμάνι της Πάφου παίζει έναν πρωταρχικό ρόλο.
The port of Paphos plays a primary role and is one of the most important ports in the East Mediterranean. That is proven by the very large number of findings that show the commercial exchanges and other contacts. Paphos was taken care by the Byzantines, who repaired the harbor and built a castle by the sea. The port remained an important station, as it was the first one for those who were coming from the west, and the last when they sailed from the east. The catastrophic earthquake of the 4th century destroyed Paphos to the ground, and as a result, the administration center of the island moved to Salamis. The port acquired the necessary infrastructure and welcomed the apostles Paul and Barnabas, coming from Seleucia on their way to spread Christianity everywhere. The earthquakes kept changing the landscape. Salamis was totally rebuilt by great Constantine's son, taking the name Constantia, and for the next centuries the ruined Arsinoe hosted today's Famagusta. The intense commercial activity of the island continued during the Byzantine times, when amphorae and luxury items kept coming mainly from the Aegean islands. This activity is reflected on the urban character of the coastal cities of Cyprus, where there have been excavated luxurious mansions and early Christian basilicas. In the beginnings of the Byzantine times, Proconnesian marble prevails in all early Christian basilicas. In some cases, the whole architectural decoration of a church was coming processed from the region of Proconnesus. But Olkas did not connect Cyprus and Constantinople only on a commercial level. Along with her cargoes, she carried and distributed to the provinces all the new trends of the capital. Already, since the early Byzantine times, in the Church of Panagia Kanakaria, we spot on its apse the mosaic depiction of Virgin Mary following the doctrine of the Fourth Ecumenical Council. The mosaic was probably designed in the workshops of Constantinople and was executed by a Cypriot workshop. The port of Kyrenia is important and very special because just across in Antalya, on the Asia Minor coast, there was the base of the Byzantine fleet, and whenever Cyprus suffered from Arabian or pirate raids, the ships rushed to protect it. During the Middle Byzantine era, next to the harbor of Kyrenia, a castle was built with a church of St. George inside it.
Κάστρα, έχοντας το κέντρο τους τις εκκλησίες, ουσιαστικά
The castles, having churches in their interior, distinctly reflect the ideology of the Byzantine state, that is protection connected with the saint worshipped in the church, whose help makes the walls impregnable.
Το στοιχείο που βοηθάει στο να μετατραπούν σε απόρθητα τείχη.
A similar castle exists in the port of Larnaca.
Σημαντικό φαίνεται ότι είναι και το λιμάνι του Κιτίου.
The port of Kition seems to be also important, as it is frequently mentioned in the Byzantine times, pointing out its role both as a transit center and also as a religious one, since pilgrims and travelers used to stop there on the way to the St. Lazarus Church, the Church of Panagia Angeloktisti in Kiti village, with its exquisite mosaic composition, or to Stavrovouni Monastery. The 7th century was marked by the raids and the looting of the Arabs, who gradually conquered lands in Africa and Near East. Inevitably, Cyprus became Arabs' target. Maritime communications became difficult, resulting in the loss of the urban splendor and the prevailing of the agricultural character. Thanks to its ancient temples and the worship of Aphrodite Morphu, the coastal town of Soli became an important religious center of antiquity, along with the neighboring city of Vouni. Apostle Marcus, like many merchants and pilgrims, traveled from the ports of this bay. The accumulated wealth lured the Arab raiders, who destroyed and looted Soli. The Basilica of Soli was built again, but the raiders forced the inhabitants to move inland, transforming Theomorphou, a well-protected Byzantine center. The port activities took place in the nearby Karavostasi, the harbor of Byzantine Theomorphou. Minerals exported from the mines of the region were transferred with the wagons to the port for the ships that were waiting to the harbor. With the strengthening of the Byzantine Empire, Cyprus became the center of military operations in the East Mediterranean. The island's fortifications were reinforced. As can be seen in the port of Kyrenia, the Arabian danger was neutralized, while a flourishing of all kinds of arts is recorded in the island.
Καλλιτέχνες από την Κωνσταντινούπολη βλέπουμε να έρχονται στην Κύπρο.
Artists from Constantinople come to Cyprus and work during the 11th and 12th centuries, when Cyprus becomes a Byzantine bastion in the Middle East. Byzantine dignitaries come and build churches and monasteries in the architectural styles of Constantinople. A well-known example of workshops who came to Cyprus is the one of Theodore Apsavdis, who paints the Inglistra, the place of seclusion of Saint Neophytos in Paphos, as well as the Church of Panagia of Arakos in Lagoudera. The beginning of the Crusades upgraded Cyprus' position in the plans of the Byzantine Empire. Thanks to this event, the fortifications in Kition, Limassol, Paphos and Kyrenia were restored and reinforced. The coastal stations began to gradually develop, and the ports turned into cities with busy markets. Ships from and to Cyprus ports could cross safely the Mediterranean again. On the site of ancient Amathunda, Demetrius Poliorkitis in the 3rd century built the first port of Limassol, which most probably was in use during the Arabian raids. However, Limassol was founded after the retreat of the Arabs and knew an unprecedented growth as the main Cyprus port in the 12th and 13th centuries. Its thriving is due to the privilege of mooring granted to Venetians, Genoese and Pisan ships by the Byzantine Emperor John II Komnenos, as well as to the arrival of Richard the Lionheart in 1191, who conquered Cyprus and controlled all the island's ports. The Latin conquest of Cyprus in 1191 was a landmark in the history of the island. The Frankish Kingdom of Cyprus turned the island into a precious starting point for supplying among the Latin centers of the West and their colonies in the East. Cyprus, becoming one of the Venetian colonies, took its own place in the commercial network developed by the most serene Republic of Venice between the East and the West.
Αυτή την εποχή έχουμε σύσφιξη των σχέσεων πλέον με την Δυτική Ευρώπη.
That time, we have the tightening of relations with the Western Europe and a large-scale trading of products. Grains is the product that kept being exported from Cyprus, but sugar that is being produced by the sugar canes as well. We also had the trading of textiles that continued during the Venetian rule and the important trading of cotton. With the fall of Acre in 1291, Cyprus secured its role as one of the bigger transit centers in the Mediterranean, with main port the one of Famagusta, which gathered merchants from everywhere in Europe. Therefore, a great number of churches of different denominations and religious orders were constructed to serve various religious needs. Genoese ships sailed to Cyclades and Rhodes and ended up in Egypt via Cyprus, while silk products were being exported to Tripolis in Palestine. During the Venetian rule, Famagusta acquired its impressive castle, while the St. Lazarus port in Larnaca was used as the main weather-protected harbor in the Kingdom of Cyprus for supplying ships that transferred merchants and pilgrims to the Holy Land. The relation with Constantinople still existed and influenced considerably the art of the island. In the 14th century, we observe an extended activity, which becomes more and more intense, resulting in the 16th century the appearance of the so-called Cyprus Renaissance art, based on the Paleologan art as well as on the influence from the West.
Να γίνεται δεκτή στην Κύπρο γιατί ήδη είχε πρωτοεφαρμοστεί στη Βασιλεύουσα.
The Ottoman occupation caused an inevitable decrease of the commercial activities that were restored during the Russian-Turkish wars thanks to the capitulations.
Τα λιμάνια της Κύπρου συνεχίζουν να έχουν το μεγάλο τους ρόλο και κατά την περίοδο της τουρκοκρατίας.
The ports of Cyprus continue to play an important role in the years of Ottoman rule, with typical example the case of Kikos Monastery, which owned ships transferring not only merchants, but mainly the farming products of the monastery's lands to other regions of the Ottoman Empire.
Στις υπόλοιπες περιοχές της Οθωμανικής Αυτοκρατορίας.
Olkas completes one more journey, having sailed thousands of nautical miles from the coast of Black Sea to to the Byzantine Cyprus, coming back, as she always did, to the queen of the cities, Constantinople, the brightest lighthouse of the medieval world. On her deck, seamen, merchants, pilgrims, artists and ambassadors have traveled. Her crew has spoken many languages, met miscellaneous races, reviving the journeys of Jason and Odysseus, exploring distant and unknown places, and expressing the perennial human's desire for communication. Olkas, what will her next journey be? To what new seas will she set sails next?